This moment didn't arrive randomly, it arrived on schedule. You may have wondered why progress felt slow while strain stayed high, yet timing was never careless. Heaven has been watching closely, weighing endurance, integrity, and obedience far beyond visible outcomes. Divine pride is never impulsive. It forms through sustained observation, through extended periods where faithfulness remained steady, without applause or assurance. You need to understand that God's pride grows from what he observes, not what others assume. Promotion does not come from the east or the west or from the desert, but God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. Psalm 75, verse 6 to 7. Advancement begins long before it appears. Heaven records decisions made when no one else is present, when obedience costs comfort, and when consistency replaces excitement. What you carried in private mattered more than what you displayed publicly. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. Proverbs 15, verse 3. Nothing was overlooked. Every restrained response, every silent sacrifice, every moment you chose integrity over recognition was noted. You were not ignored. You were being trusted with formation. This phase of elevation is not the result of striving for status. It is the response to alignment cultivated quietly. You did not chase visibility. You protected faithfulness. You did not demand affirmation. You maintained obedience. Because of that, advancement arrives as confirmation, not compensation. God lifts what is ready to represent him without distortion. Before change becomes visible, it is often sensed internally. You may have felt subtle shifts, a growing clarity, a quiet confidence replacing striving. These inner movements signal readiness. Preparation always precedes expansion. God strengthens foundations before increasing reach, ensuring that what rises can remain standing when pressure returns. Faithfulness in obscurity always precedes recognition. Long before others acknowledge growth, heaven already validates it. When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen. Isaiah 60, verse 22. Divine timing reflects readiness, never impatience. Delay was not denial, it was development. You were being prepared to carry more without losing yourself. Now visibility begins to follow cultivation. This does not mean life becomes effortless, but it does mean purpose becomes clearer. God entrusts influence to those who learned humility in unseen places. What emerges now carries substance, depth, and stability because it was shaped without shortcuts. You are stepping into a time where what was practiced quietly becomes evident publicly. Heaven witnessed perseverance others never saw. God observed character formed through sustained strain, wisdom refined through waiting, and strength developed without recognition. This elevation is not fragile because it was built on truth, not urgency. Friend, heaven saw what no one else noticed. Long before voices affirmed progress or hands applauded growth, endurance was unfolding quietly within you. You learned that the most defining conflicts rarely announce themselves. They occur internally, where choices are made without witnesses and resolve is tested without recognition. In those hidden spaces, perseverance becomes necessary rather than impressive, and strength is proven privately before it is ever visible publicly. Pressure arrives without ceremony. There are times when battles surface without explanation, demanding resilience while offering no validation. You carry emotional weight without language for it, holding tension that cannot be shared without misunderstanding. Yet even then, faith does not fracture. Scripture gives language to those experiences. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8. Survival is not accidental. It is sustained by trust when clarity feels distant. As the strain lingers, energy thins. You discover how easy collapse could have been, how reasonable retreat might have appeared. Still, something deeper resists surrender. Identity remains intact even while comfort erodes. Pain attempts to redefine worth, but truth holds its ground. Though the righteous fall many times, the Lord delivers him from them all. Psalm 34, verse 19. Deliverance does not always mean removal. Often it means inner strength reinforced from within. From there, isolation begins teaching lessons applause never could. Loneliness presses hard, yet devotion does not dissolve. Quiet obedience replaces emotional momentum. You begin to understand how commitment matures when enthusiasm fades. Devotion anchors itself not in feeling, but in conviction. Each unanswered question refines focus, teaching you to trust God's character rather than demand constant reassurance. Then something unexpected forms beneath the weight. Perseverance stops being a reaction and becomes a signature. You are no longer merely surviving difficulty, you are being shaped by it. Resistance develops muscle, patience grows depth. You recognize that what withstands pressure without bitterness is being prepared for responsibility. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. James 1 verse 12. Perseverance produces readiness, not resentment. With time, survival itself transforms purpose. Hardship does not harden your heart, it clarifies it. Refinement replaces frustration. Sharp edges begin smoothing reactions, slow discernment sharpens. Steadfastness purifies motivation. You are no longer driven by the need to prove anything, only by the desire to remain aligned with God's will, regardless of outcome. Through all of this, unseen warfare continues. Spiritual weight presses heavily, yet faith stays intact. Doubt knocks often, but belief answers stronger. You come to see that remaining faithful without relief develops a different kind of strength. It is quieter, steadier, and far less dependent on circumstances. That strength holds under pressure because it is forged there. At certain points, strength diminishes noticeably. Energy wanes. Hope requires intention. Still, collapse is resisted not through force but through surrender. Yielding control becomes survival. Trust fills the gaps where understanding fails. Endurance does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers consistency, one more day. Gradually, perspective shifts. Pain does not distort identity. Difficulty does not rewrite calling. Intensity clarifies assignment rather than confusing it. God's pride is never rooted in spectacle. It is rooted in steadiness. Heaven values what is protected during prolonged strain more than what is displayed during brief success. Without realizing it, endurance lays groundwork. Each unseen victory reinforces capacity. Every resisted collapse strengthens foundations. Loneliness refines devotion. Discernment sharpens through sustained demand. Survival layered repeatedly produces refinement instead of bitterness, stability instead of fragility, wisdom instead of resentment. And what endurance formed in silence is proven when comfort is removed. Pressure does not invent values, it exposes what has already been planted within you. When ease faded and options narrowed, your decisions became mirrors, reflecting who you truly were beneath desire, fatigue, and frustration. Heaven was not impressed by what you proclaimed, but by what you practiced, when relief was unavailable and shortcuts appeared reasonable. Under that weight, integrity did not collapse. You maintained alignment in situations where compromise would have gone unnoticed, unchallenged, and even justified. No warning signs flashed. No voices corrected you. Still, something anchored you. Proverbs 11 verse 3 declares that the integrity of the upright guides them, and you lived that guidance quietly. Integrity became an internal compass rather than a public performance directing choices when no consequence seemed immediate. As tension intensified, retaliation often felt deserved. You were wronged, misunderstood, or dismissed, yet restraint prevailed. Instead of answering injury with injury, you chose a higher response. Romans 12 verse 17 instructs to repay no one evil for evil, and that truth shaped your reactions. Righteousness did not mean weakness. It meant strength, disciplined by purpose. You refused to let temporary anger write permanent consequences. That restraint came with cost. Obedience did not reward you quickly or visibly. In some seasons, doing what was right seemed expensive, asking you to release advantage, pride, or comfort. Still, you upheld what was right even when it demanded sacrifice rather than applause. Eternal consequence outweighed short-lived relief. You chose obedience not because it felt beneficial, but because it was right. Meanwhile, emotional strain pressed relentlessly. Fatigue blurred clarity. Stress amplified temptation. External pressure pushed hard for easier paths, yet purity of action remained protected. You learned that righteousness is not sustained by emotion, but by conviction. When feelings fluctuated, commitment held steady. Purity was preserved not by isolation from pressure, but by resolve within it. At critical junctures, silence tempted you. Withholding truth would have been simpler, less confrontational, and far less costly. Yet you honored truth anyway. You spoke honestly when concealment seemed safer. You acted transparently when ambiguity would have shielded you. Truth was not wielded aggressively, but it was not abandoned. Heaven noted every instance where you chose light over ease. Before any recognition appeared, faithfulness was practiced privately. Long before outcomes validated obedience, consistency marked your days. No audience applauded your restraint. No correction followed your discipline. Still, faithfulness continued. Matthew 5 verse 16 speaks of letting light shine before others. Yet your light shone first in unseen places. Public visibility followed private alignment, not the other way around. As time passed, a pattern emerged. Choices under pressure formed a testimony without words. Heaven observed decisions made when no applause followed and no rebuke threatened. God saw times where character stood alone, unsupported by reward or fear. Those choices mattered. They revealed trust that obedience was never wasted, even when results delayed. Over time, discernment was refined. You learned to pause instead of react to weigh eternal impact rather than emotional satisfaction. Decisions became steadier, less impulsive, more grounded. Righteousness matured from rule-following into relationship-driven obedience. You were no longer asking what you could get away with, but what honored God fully. That posture shifted how you moved through conflict. You no longer chased justification or validation. Alignment replaced argument. Peace replaced defensiveness. Confidence settled, quietly rooted in knowing that God saw what others missed. Integrity became its own reward, carrying assurance no circumstance could remove. When voices grow quiet and reassurance fades, something sacred begins forming within you. You discover that belief does not rely on applause, agreement, or visible progress. In those unobserved spaces, faith stops borrowing strength from encouragement and learns to stand on reliance alone. What remains when support disappears reveals how deeply trust has taken root. As days stretched without answers, perseverance continued, even while evidence delayed. You learned to walk without confirmation, choosing belief before results appeared. Hebrews 11 verse 1 defines faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and that truth became lived experience. Waiting sharpened dependence, teaching you that faith anchored in God does not require immediate proof to remain steady. Prayer continued without emotional feedback. You still spoke, still listened, still showed up even when feelings offered nothing in return. Prayer shifted from emotional release into disciplined devotion. You were no longer seeking sensation, only connection. Consistency replaced intensity. Each quiet moment reinforced dependence, proving that prayer grounded in obedience carries power beyond emotion. Silence lingered longer than expected. Hope required protection during stretches where nothing seemed to move. You guarded it intentionally, refusing to let unanswered questions erode expectation. Psalm 62, verse 5-6 urges, "Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. My hope comes from Him." That instruction became posture. Hope rested not in change, but in God's unchanging character. People could no longer sustain what only God was meant to carry. You released the need for human reassurance and leaned fully into divine sufficiency. That shift felt lonely at first, yet it produced freedom. Trusting God alone removed pressure from relationships and anchored your assurance somewhere unshakable. Spiritual discipline replaced emotional motivation. You showed up when desire faded. You remained consistent when passion dimmed. Faith matured through repetition rather than excitement. Waiting no longer felt empty. It became formative. Each day of perseverance strengthened resolve instead of breeding despair. You learned that staying power grows quietly, reinforced by routine obedience. Over time, confidence in God's character deepened. You no longer needed signs to believe in His goodness. Trust expanded because His nature proved reliable. Isaiah 50 verse 10 speaks to those who walk in darkness, yet trust the Lord. You embodied that truth, choosing reliance even when clarity felt absent. Assurance matured beyond circumstance into conviction. Belief itself changed texture. It moved beyond feeling into foundation. Faith no longer rose and fell with mood or momentum. It settled, rooted firmly in truth rather than experience. That maturity brought peace. You no longer feared quiet seasons because you understood their purpose. Silence became training ground rather than punishment. In isolation, listening sharpened. Without competing voices, discernment increased. You recognized how much clarity arrives when distractions fade. Trust practiced alone refined focus, teaching you to hear direction without noise. That attentiveness strengthened responsiveness, preparing you to move wisely when instruction came. Loneliness, once heavy, transformed into sacred space. You realized solitude was not abandonment, but invitation. God used isolation to deepen intimacy, removing dependence on external validation. What felt like separation became alignment. Faith strengthened through proximity rather than distance. Consistency over time reshaped identity. You stopped defining yourself by visible outcomes and began anchoring worth in obedience. Faithfulness itself became reward. Confidence emerged quietly, unannounced yet undeniable. You carried assurance without needing affirmation. Beloved pain tried to change the heart but failed. When loss arrived uninvited and betrayal cut deeper than expected, something within you refused to harden. You felt the impact fully, yet you chose preservation over corrosion. Instead of letting injury redefine character, you guarded what mattered most. That decision did not come from denial. It came from reverence for the heart God entrusted to you. As disappointment unfolded, cynicism waited for permission. You had reason to withdraw, to close emotional doors, to reduce tenderness for the sake of survival. Still, restraint prevailed. You came to understand that protection does not require bitterness. Scripture counsels, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4 verse 23. Guarding meant intention, not isolation. Then came the moment where retaliation seemed justified. Words could have wounded back. Distance could have punished silence. Yet healing became the chosen response. You allowed God to tend wounds rather than turning pain into weapons. Healing took time, honesty, and courage. It required acknowledging damage without allowing it to dictate behavior. Compassion did not erase hurt, it redirected it. Even with trust broken, love remained present. Love did not excuse what happened, but it refused to disappear. You distinguished love from access, kindness from vulnerability. That balance preserved dignity on both sides. Love stayed alive because you understood it as a posture, not a transaction. This posture reflected a purity that runs deeper than circumstance. Seasons passed where bitterness felt reasonable. Many would have applauded hardness as wisdom. Still, compassion survived. You resisted narratives that framed tenderness as weakness. Instead, you recognized compassion as strength under control. Jesus declared, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Matthew 5, verse 8. Purity was not naivety, it was clarity. Forgiveness entered quietly without minimizing pain. You did not rush it or spiritualize wounds away. Forgiveness unfolded deliberately, honoring truth while releasing vengeance. You forgave without pretending betrayal never happened. That honesty protected your inner life from suppression while freeing it from poison. Forgiveness became an act of stewardship, not denial. Boundaries followed forgiveness. You guarded what mattered without closing yourself off. Access was adjusted, not erased. Wisdom shaped proximity. This balance required discernment daily. You realized that openness and protection are not enemies. A heart can remain soft while boundaries stand firm. This discernment prevented repeated injury without sacrificing compassion. Throughout this process, God watched the inner work closely. Outward achievements mattered less than inward preservation. While others measured success by outcomes, God valued what survived within. Ezekiel records God's promise. "I will give you a new heart and put a new heart within you." Ezekiel 36, verse 26. Renewal honored endurance that protected tenderness under strain. You also discovered that grief could coexist with gratitude. Tears did not cancel reverence. Questions did not erase devotion. You brought confusion honestly before God, trusting Him with what you could not resolve alone. In that exchange, sincerity replaced pretense. The heart stayed clean because truth stayed present. You learned to lament without accusing, to ache without abandoning hope. This posture preserved softness even while processing loss. Rather than numbing emotion, you allowed God to shape it. Sensitivity became discernment instead of fragility. Through patience, your inner rhythm returned steady again after shock. Each honest prayer loosened residue left by pain. Each moment of surrender prevented resentment from settling. You remained alive, responsive and teachable, ready to love again without fear of being diminished by past wounds. Wisdom moved forward with you, choosing openness, carefully remembering lessons gained, yet refusing to let former sorrow dictate future connection or generosity, with peace intact within. What was refined inwardly prepared you for summons outwardly. You discovered that summons arrive before certainty, often interrupting comfort and exposing hesitation. The invitation came without full explanation, yet urgency pressed gently, insisting that response mattered more than readiness. In that space, you realized that calling respects timing, determined by God, not emotional preparedness, and response shapes capacity before assurance ever appears. Almost immediately, instruction arrived with limited clarity. You did not receive every detail, outcome, or reassurance before acting. Still, movement followed direction, like Moses, who protested weakness yet heard. "Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth." Exodus 4, verse 10 to 12. You stepped forward while questions lingered. Action became the language of trust when understanding felt partial. As momentum formed, emotional security attempted to negotiate terms. Fear suggested waiting until you felt stronger, wiser, or more certain. Yet faith rose above the need for internal calm. You chose alignment over comfort, believing God's guidance outweighed emotional stability. That decision did not erase anxiety. It simply refused to let anxiety lead. Commitment became the anchor when feelings fluctuated. Soon, purpose clarified priorities. You recognized that assignment demanded courage beyond self-preservation. Comfort would have delayed impact. Purpose required availability. When Isaiah responded, "Here am I. Send me," Isaiah 6 verse 8. Readiness was not the prerequisite, willingness was. You echoed that posture, offering presence before proficiency. With that, yes, the order reversed. Confidence did not arrive first. Faith stepped ahead, believing growth would follow surrender rather than precede it. You learned that assurance often trails commitment. As steps accumulated, inner stability slowly formed. Faith was not the reward for readiness, it was the cause of it. Then movement began without full self-assurance. You advanced while still aware of limitations. Progress did not wait for internal resolution. Each step carried uncertainty, yet direction remained steady. This movement reshaped perspective. You realized that standing still would not resolve fear, but moving forward would train courage. Fear remained present, yet it lost authority. You acknowledged it honestly without granting control. Fear spoke loudly, but trust answered louder. You remembered that God's sufficiency outweighed personal inadequacy. Scripture affirms, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think of anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 5. Dependence replaced self-reliance. Growth accelerated through response rather than preparation alone. Training occurred mid-motion. Lessons arrived while walking, not waiting. You gained skill through responsibility, not rehearsal. This process dismantled perfectionism and replaced it with reliance. God used action as the classroom and faithfulness as the curriculum. Unexpectedly, divine confidence expanded. God entrusted more because willingness proved consistent. Ability developed because availability remained steady. You realized God valued responsiveness over expertise. Skill could be taught. Surrender could not be forced. Willingness opened access that talent alone could not secure. At this stage, clarity increased through participation. Understanding followed involvement. You noticed that insight often arrived after obedience, not before it. Revelation unfolded in layers as faith stayed active. Each completed step prepared capacity for the next instruction. Pressure intensified, yet assurance strengthened. You no longer waited to feel ready before responding. Readiness began forming through repetition. Practice trained reflexes. Faith matured into conviction. You relied on God's partnership more than personal evaluation. Looking back, willingness stands out more than skill. The yes mattered more than the resume. God's trust rested on surrender, not perfection. You stepped forward unsure yet supported. Availability became your offering, and God supplied what you lacked along the way. What unfolded next did not emerge from flawless preparation, but from responsive obedience. A willing yes opened doors preparation alone could not. You see the fire refined instead of destroyed, and you discovered that opposition was never proof of failure. You quickly realized that conflict often arrives where purpose is active. Pressure did not appear to cancel direction, it surfaced to reveal it. When resistance intensified, clarity followed. Attacks did not confuse calling, they outlined it. What pushed back hardest identified what mattered most, and you recognized that spiritual friction was evidence of movement rather than delay. The battlefield reshaped your understanding. Scripture names the reality plainly. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, in Ephesians 6 verse 12. That truth reframed the struggle. You stopped mislabeling opposition as personal misfortune and started recognizing it as spiritual resistance. Once the lens changed, fear lost its authority. Discernment replaced panic and steadiness replaced reaction. Pressure then began its deeper work. Endurance was not added suddenly. It was developed layer by layer. Each moment of resistance strengthened capacity. You came to understand how to remain grounded while challenged, how to stand without rushing defense. The weight that once threatened collapse became training. Stability grew quietly as emotional volatility lost its grip. You did not become harder, you became steadier. Opposition also refined belief. Faith expanded because it was tested repeatedly rather than spared. Scripture affirms this process in 1 Peter 1 verse 7, where faith is refined like gold through fire. You experienced that refinement personally. Confidence stopped relying on outcomes and rooted itself in God's character. Trust matured beyond hope for relief and anchored itself in certainty that God was present within the conflict. Another shift followed. Resistance confirmed proximity to breakthrough. The closer you moved toward assignment, the louder opposition became. That pattern no longer discouraged you. It instructed you. You learned to interpret resistance as confirmation that progress was real. Breakthrough was not distant. It was contested. Instead of retreating, you leaned forward with clearer focus and stronger resolve. Repeated trials then built authority. Authority did not arrive through ease or applause. It was forged through perseverance. Every moment you chose faith over fear added weight to your voice and clarity to your presence. You stopped striving to prove strength. Strength emerged naturally from consistency. Others sensed it without explanation. Authority became evident because it was earned quietly through endurance. Conflict also clarified dependence. You recognized quickly that strength could not come from self-effort alone. God allowed sustained opposition to mature reliance. Each challenge drove you deeper into trust rather than self-protection. You learned to stand clothed in God's strength instead of emotional adrenaline. That reliance stabilized you when circumstances tried to destabilize identity. Victory took on a new definition. Winning no longer meant the absence of struggle. It meant remaining faithful within it. Romans 8 verse 37 declares that you are more than conquerors through Christ, not by avoiding battles, but by overcoming them. You embodied that truth. Triumph showed up as resilience, clarity, and unshaken commitment rather than dramatic escape. With time, emotional fragility faded. Stability replaced reactivity. You responded instead of reacting. You listened instead of assuming. Discernment guided movement. The storms that once rattled confidence became familiar terrain. You did not minimize difficulty. You mastered response. That mastery revealed growth that no classroom could provide. Purpose continued sharpening under pressure. Opposition exposed calling instead of obscuring it. Each challenge stripped away distraction and refined focus. You became less divided internally and more aligned outwardly. What mattered gained definition. What did not belong lost influence. Pressure simplified priorities and strengthened direction. When certainty felt distant, availability stayed close. You showed up without needing ideal conditions. Seasons changed, pressure shifted, and visibility fluctuated, yet your yes remained steady. Heaven values that posture because willingness signals reliance. It reveals a heart that moves with God instead of waiting to feel prepared. That consistency became a quiet invitation for greater responsibility. Momentum builds when availability refuses to disappear. You did not pause faithfulness until circumstances improved. Whether the assignment felt small or unseen, you remained present. That consistency carried weight. Scripture speaks clearly in Proverbs 3 verse 5-6, calling you to trust the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. You lived that principle by responding without demanding full explanation. Direction unfolded because dependence stayed active. Another layer formed through teachability. Experience increased, but humility remained intact. You stayed willing to grow, adjust, and listen. Correction did not threaten identity. Growth did not feel like demotion. Psalm 25 verse 9 reminds that God guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. That promise became practical as you welcomed instruction without resistance. Teachability protected momentum by keeping pride from slowing progress. Ego often interrupts calling, yet you refused that detour. Obedience was not filtered through self-image or reputation. When the path required invisibility, you accepted it. When it required stretching, you embraced it. Control loosened its grip as surrender strengthened its hold. You came to understand that leadership begins with surrender, not assertion. Heaven responds to that stance with confidence, because surrender leaves room for God's direction. Growth then became an invitation rather than a threat. Expansion did not intimidate you. Responsibility did not produce fear. You recognized that growth is stewardship, not status. Each new layer required deeper reliance, and you welcomed that exchange. Control was surrendered in favor of trust, echoing the disposition seen in Luke 1 verse 38, when Mary responded, "Behold the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me according to thy word." Willingness like that still moves heaven. Motives stayed aligned with service rather than recognition.